This is the most realistic wilderness survival challenge I've seen. 8 contestants were dropped at Sars Lake within the Arctic Circle. Aside from basic supplies provided by the show, contestants could not bring any tools or food. The last person standing could win a $500,000 prize. Mads was the first contestant to appear. Before the boat even docked, he eagerly threw his smelly shoes ashore. Barefoot, he began his journey to victory. At 26, he was already a meditation teacher, accustomed to meditating for 3 hours each morning. He had prepared extensively for this challenge, spending 6 months training outdoors. After quickly setting up a tent, he began looking for food. Standing by the shore, he scanned the area, then stripped and walked into deeper waters with a fishing net. The next contestant, Trina, appeared tearful, seeming ready to leave just upon arrival. Yet, she soon shouted excitedly upon landing. It must be said, women are indeed fickle. She was an adventure instructor at a boarding school, 32 years old and fond of thrilling outdoor activities. She joined the challenge to boast in front of her students. Back to Mads, he was netting fish, bare-bottomed. Just as one might criticize him for seeking attention, he claimed being nude helped improve his luck. He caught 3 fish of varying sizes. The benefit of trout is their high-fat content. He skillfully cleaned, chopped, and potted them. Before cooking, he added some foraged mushrooms, not expecting them to discolor the dish, turning it into a dark culinary mess. Trina caught a fish barehanded by the lake. Though small, she was grateful. She carefully gutted and slowly pan-fried the fish. The rest she used to make soup, making the most of the fish with 2 dishes. The meal was satisfying. After refueling, she had the energy to chop wood and build a shelter. But she soon became hungry again. So she took her net to the lake, hoping to catch a bigger fish. At just 1.5 meters tall, she struggled with the net. After much effort, she successfully cast it, leaving it to fate whether she would eat. Her shelter was probably the most luxurious so far. Built with double-layered logs, moss stuffed between for fireproofing and insulation. It was spacious and well-supplied, with neatly arranged walls. Because she was constantly busy, she didn't record much footage. Maita, an outdoor guide who had started her own company, joined the competition to advertise and promote her business. Fleming, the man tinkering with an oil drum, knew the importance of fishing from past episodes. Instead of using it as a bath or fireplace, he attached 2 sticks and made a small boat. He was a falconer who had once solo killed a bear and eaten its heart raw, believing it gave him the bear's strength. He bragged about this to his family, determined to be the season's champion. After launching the raft, he tested it and felt no stress, but knew he needed to improve it for farther waters. So, he cut his moisture-proof mat and tied pieces to the raft's 4 corners, prioritizing food over sleep. Equipped with his net, he rowed the raft into deeper waters. The next contestant is Henrik P, an architect who enjoys studying quirky things. Although he's only in his 50s, he already has 2 grandchildren. He joined the competition to become a super grandpa. He chose to settle by a cliff, tying a rope to a stick wedged into a rock crevice. He secured the other end of the rope to a tree and covered it with a waterproof sheet. Although it's drafty on 3 sides, it at least has a backrest and a roof, sufficient to withstand wind and rain. Since eating that pot of fish, Mads has been feeling dizzy and nauseous. He tosses and turns in bed, unable to sleep. He tried to collect some firewood, but almost fainted. By nightfall, his condition had not improved, and it's uncertain if he can make it through the night. This is the first time I've seen someone self-sabotage their equipment. Another contestant, Henrik D, is a 39-year-old vegetarian with a happy family of 4. To prepare, he did a 7-day fast, believing that nature's bounty could help him win without taking the lives of other animals. He threw the fishing gear provided by the show directly into the fire. The next challenger, Rasmus, was lucky to catch a fish, but unfortunately, a predator got to it first, leaving him only the head. Despite this, he was happy, as it proved there were fish in the area. However, he accidentally cut a large hole in his net while tidying it up, and frustrated, threw it on the ground. A heavy motorcyclist, he longs for a free life and is usually active in social events. Now alone, he struggles to cope. He found a stick and treasured it, venturing into the woods to find a place to build a shelter. Finding only damp swamps, he turned his attention back to the distant beach. After some searching, he found some wood and began building a shelter using the materials he had, creating an A-frame covered with a waterproof sheet and securing it with stones. The next contestant, Suna, a 41-year-old truck driver, has lived by the sea his whole life, with his family deeply passionate about fishing. Confident in his ancestral fishing skills, he believes he can last until the end. His mother even knitted him a sweater embroidered with his name, symbolizing his family's support. Upon landing, he was delighted to see many footprints on the beach, guessing that elk might be nearby. Although excited, he remained focused and quickly constructed a large tripod. However, he realized the waterproof cloth was too small and decided to rebuild. While others worried about food, Fleming had already started looking for places to farm fish. Since making a raft from an oil drum, he has never returned empty-handed. He cleaned his catch right on the shore, specifically leaving the guts to use as bait. After wrapping it in a waterproof cloth, he buried it in a pit to keep it fresh and protect against insect bites. He then found a small stream in the woods and submerged the bag of fish hung from a branch, creating a natural refrigerator to preserve the fish. After all his work, it was time to happily enjoy his meal, with 3 big pots of fish, giving Fleming great satisfaction. Henrik P's days have been quite miserable compared to others. Since arriving 4 days ago, he has suffered from nearly constant insomnia. Accustomed to a warm, soft bed at home, he finds the wilderness uncomfortable everywhere. His despair is evident from his expression. Adding to his frustration, his fishing net has yielded no catch. In a moment of desperation, he tripped and fell. After recomposing himself, he decided to move the net to deeper waters. Trina's situation is also grim. She has only eaten a small fish over the past few days. She swore that if she couldn't catch another fish today, she would go home. While retrieving her net, she prayed for divine mercy. Perhaps God took pity on her. She found a dead fish in her net. Eager to eat, she returned home and decided to use the fish's innards as bait after filling her stomach. Unfortunately, her choice of fishing spot was poor. Her first cast got stuck on the bottom, and after struggling in vain, she cut the line cleanly and set up a new hook to continue fishing. However, the line then got tangled in a tree branch. She persisted until sunset without any catch and returned to her shelter, doubting her survival skills for the first time. On the 5th day, Fleming woke up early and rushed to the shore to check the fishing line he had set the night before. As he lifted the line, he felt a fish on the hook. After a frantic struggle, he managed to pull a slippery eel ashore. Although not large, it would make a decent breakfast soup. Suni finally had his moment of glory. The moment he pulled up his fishing net, he felt its heavy weight and rejoiced at catching 3 large fish, enough for a hearty meal. He quickly cleaned them and started cooking on the shore. Henrik P's breakfast was still plain boiled berries. The more he ate, the more he felt life's bitterness. Hungry and sleep-deprived, he had become visibly thinner. He decided to build a shelter, tying the ends of a waterproof cloth to 2 trees and making a simple hammock. Carefully shifting onto it, he finally lay down feeling stable and adjusted to find the most comfortable position. Henrik D, who had been missing for a few days and was presumed unlikely to survive a single episode, was actually doing well. He had built a large A-frame shelter and was about to finish by cutting a smoke vent. Sitting inside, he admired his handiwork. Maita is currently the most stable. She is eating fish heartily, replenishing her energy before starting to build a dock for fishing in deeper waters. She constructed a tripod and nailed it into the water, then dragged several long, thick logs to lay on top. After casting her net into deeper waters, she showed us around her luxurious shelter. Her tools hung on the wall, opposite her solid wood bed topped with a sleeping bag, and the walls were sealed with moss and an additional layer of waterproof cloth for moisture resistance and warmth. Survival challenge faces. Extreme weather. Heavy rain struck a deserted island in Norway. Trina braved the rain to check her catch. By the lake, she vaguely saw the shadows of fish. She prayed as she gathered the net, but despite her efforts, she couldn't pull it up, completely frustrating her. Meanwhile, Henrik P's roof was leaking badly. The rain flowed down the rock wall, nearly sweeping him away. He had to remove the tarp and find a new campsite. After a long walk, he found a sheltered flat spot, tied the tarp between 2 large trees, and set up a temporary shelter for the night. Fleming was always pleased with his dwelling, with a mountain behind and water beside, full of fish. Everything seemed perfect, but the mountain stream flowed right into his house. He intended to dig a drainage ditch to divert the rainwater, but the hard ground quickly discouraged him. With no other option, he used 2 sticks to support the tarp, enveloping his shelter completely. Maita was the only one unaffected by the rain, busy building her shelter, which now provided a comfortable life. After the rain, she checked today's catch but found her net empty, possibly due to the weather. At the same time, Suna was on his way to check his net but was shocked to see the stream had turned into a waterfall. The net set by the stream was swept far away. He tried to retrieve it, but the net didn't move, stuck at the bottom of the lake. Frustrated, he left cursing. Suddenly, the production team's boat appeared, bringing Trina, who was waiting at the shore. She expressed that she was terribly hungry and didn't want to wait any longer. The lack of fish had completely shattered her confidence. After sending Trina away, the fate of the remaining 7 participants remained uncertain. Maita once again turned the survival challenge into a wilderness feast. The golden smoked fish, garnished with vegetables and berries, was not only nutritious and balanced, but also as appealing as a high-end restaurant meal. Maita playfully claimed her fish roasting had a unique secret. She cleaned the salmon, strung it on a branch above the fireplace, covered it with fresh pine branches when the fire was hot enough, smoking the fish to firm its texture and adding wood flavor. After eating, Maita began sawing wood, stating the unpredictable weather here made storing enough firewood necessary for a sense of security. She insulated her wooden hut with moss, carefully filling every gap to make her dwelling more comfortable. She also gathered a large amount of spruce branches to create a green, natural carpet for the floor, showcasing her excellent building skills. A sudden heavy rain soaked Mads thoroughly. To avoid delaying work, he wrapped a tarp around his lower body, humorously noting how pretty a big man looked in a dress. Considering the poor fishing results of the past few days, he decided to build a boat and try deep waters. He cut many spruce branches, cleared the excess, and wove them into a donut shape. Then, using 2 branches as a cross for support, he wrapped it in the tarp, completing a raft. An avid diver skilled in underwater hunting, he had trained in northern Canada. One goal of participating was to test his training. He carefully stepped onto the raft and was excited when it started floating with the waves. Fleming is probably the richest person so far. The bag contains 2 trout and 5 eels. To preserve the food, he built a platform in the water with wooden sticks. He tied the bag with the fish to it, using the cold lake water to keep the fish fresh. He went back to the shelter and took out his family photos, introduced everyone, and then found a place to hang the photos. To ease his longing for his family, he walked to the back mountain, enjoying the beautiful scenery and the rare tranquility. At that moment, 2 beautiful rainbows appeared in the sky, which he took as a good omen. Soon he must be really bored to film mosquitoes eating breakfast. He waited patiently for the mosquitoes to finish eating before he went to look for food. 2 days ago, his fishing net was swept away by a flood. Taking advantage of the sunlight, he hurried to retrieve it. To avoid getting his clothes wet, he entered the water naked, braving the cold water to search for the net. Despite surfacing several times, he could not find it. Without the net, there was no source of food. After much thought, he finally took out his only remaining fishing net, carefully placed it in the water, making sure not to make any mistakes this time. By day 11, Rasmus had finally caught 2 small fish with his net, meaning he had secured 2 more days of life. However, the net was damaged in the process. After returning to the shelter, he immediately started repairing the net. Fish was his only source of food and could not be wasted. This was the biggest fish Suni had caught. He killed it with a few strikes of a rock. The head alone weighed at least 10 pounds. Happy, he danced with the fish before planning to cook it. Just as he was about to start a fire, it suddenly began to hail, preventing the fire from starting and frustrating him to the point of cursing loudly. To obtain a stable and long-lasting source of fire, Henrik P first cut 3 logs to use as chopping blocks, then whittled the sticks to expose the dry parts inside. After lighting the fire, he placed some damp branches on top, slowly igniting the inner parts of the logs. This burning method not only produced high temperatures, but also lasted longer. Mads was squatting by the shore, upset, staring at his raft. It turned out that during a test in the water last time, the raft was punctured by sharp spruce trees. After a brief moment of thought, He decided to replace the hole with the waterproof fabric from the roof. He couldn't give up on this boat. It was his hope of winning the competition. Meanwhile, Rasmus was drying clothes. Last night's rain had completely flooded his cabin, turning the floor into a swamp and the fireplace into a water pit. Thus, he had to look for a new camping spot. After walking around, he decided to build a seaside villa. He cut down several large trees and built a tripod. He worked from morning until night to set up the frame, and by nightfall, he covered it with waterproof fabric to serve as a temporary shelter for the night. On the third day, he found a tree root shaped like a dinosaur, giving him a companion to talk to. Then he went to check his fishing net. It had been 5 days since his last meal. Unfortunately, the net was empty again today. He regretted eating the last fish he caught all at once. If he had saved the fish head, he could have made soup now. The more he thought about it, the more he felt dissatisfied. To satisfy his hunger, he went to pick up the remains he had discarded, which were already a bit smelly. Still, boiled, it would be edible. He ate it quite deliciously, hoping it wouldn't cause diarrhea afterward. Everyone was busy except for Henrik D, who lazily hid in his bed. He firmly believed that rainy days were best spent sleeping, convinced that he would wake up to sunshine. This was Maita's second time stripping down and entering the cold lake. When she went to check her catch, she found the fishing net stuck at the bottom of the lake. To avoid tearing it with brute force, she had to dive in to rescue it. It took a lot of effort, and although she retrieved the net, it was empty and she nearly suffered hypothermia. She quickly set up 3 wooden stakes by the fire, covered them with waterproof cloth, and made a foot bath. Pouring hot water in it, she comfortably soaked her feet, but gazing at the icy lake surface, she felt melancholic. With colder weather and less food, she wondered how long she could last. Across the lake, Rasmus was equally anxious to catch fish. He anchored one end of the net to a rock on the shore and tied the other end to a log. After stripping, he pushed the log into deeper waters. After setting the net, he waited by the lake with a pot, which turned into an overnight vigil. Fortunately, his effort paid off with 2 fish filling his net, bringing him to tears with such a rich catch. Surprisingly, another large fish hung from a second net. The sight of these 3 fish was incredibly motivating. Sune had a good day too. Arriving at the lake, he found a bounty of fish which restored much of his energy. With renewed vigor, he sped up the repairs of his shelter, a well-made triangular structure with ample space and neatly arranged belongings, solving his housing problem. He just needed a stable food source. However, after only catching a small fish in the following days, he decided to build a raft and fish in deeper waters. He sawed some wood to make a frame and secured it with rope. After attaching waterproof cloth, he was ready for a trial run. Mads was the one to watch for boat building. After several days, he repaired holes in the waterproof cloth and reinforced the base. He then added spruce branches for buoyancy, reviving his coracle. He crafted a paddle by wrapping a piece of waterproof cloth around a stick, using many materials in the process. After a successful trial, he eagerly began net fishing, anchoring one end of the net to a branch and rowing out to deeper waters with the other. Everything went smoothly, and catching fish was now up to fate. Meanwhile, Suna's makeshift raft was being tested. Using a stick as a paddle, he set off, but the raft sank as soon as he stepped on it. His crudely made raft couldn't possibly float. As for Maita, she hadn't caught any fish in 3 days. Initially stable, she began to worry, suspecting an issue with the net. She took it home for maintenance, then tried fishing from the shore, clearly a novice by her casting technique. As she waited, she carved time marks on her walking stick, muttering about moving if fish didn't bite soon. Mads's net was brimming with fish, too many to count by hand. Having a boat truly made a difference. Delighted, he returned to his shelter and started grilling fish, savoring the largest one, feeling his soul uplifted by the delicious aroma. On the 16th day of the competition, the weather on the island began to change again. To prepare for the upcoming storm, Rasmus planned to create a windbreak. He set up a horizontal beam between 2 large trees, added several wooden sticks, and filled it with leaves to form an angled deflector. When the storm hit, this barrier would protect him somewhat. Others were also busy securing their nets and boats in preparation for the storm. Fleming was rushing to complete his last wall, a sturdy and attractive structure. In contrast, Mads's cabin was much simpler, but he carefully crafted some drainage pipes, ensuring he wouldn't be flooded when it rained. Henrik P, worried about a large tree falling on his shelter, made a huge effort to saw down the tree by the door. That night, the storm swept over the island, leaving chaos in its wake the next morning. Tall spruce trees were uprooted. Suna, feeling anxious, went to check his fishing nets. What he found next nearly drove him mad. He had caught what might be the biggest fish of the season, which thrilled him immensely. However, the joy was short-lived as the net was torn. Despite his attempts to repair it, he couldn't fix it. Sitting on the shore, he lamented the brief happiness. This was his last fishing net. After a night's thought, Suna decided to quit the competition. Reluctantly, he realized that without a net, he lost his source of food. He took one last look at the beautiful place before heading home. After Suna's departure, on the 19th day, Fleming went to check his fishing nets and was delighted to catch a large fish. Soon after, he pulled up another one. Thinking two was already great, he was thrilled when he caught a third. Carrying the 3 fish home, he couldn't resist eating the roe directly from the largest fish's belly. After enjoying the roe, he fried the fish in a pan, relishing the pan-fried fish. Henrik D said he would take everyone on a tour of his mansion today. Inside, the cabin was neatly filled with wood, the floor covered with stone slabs, and a small loft above. A solid wood small bed was on the exquisite wooden floor, and a pot of colorful berries was on the dining table. His life seemed quite pleasant. Meanwhile, Rasmus, who was hungry and unable to sleep, had run out of fish from a few days ago. After much thought, he had a new idea. A large stone became his new anchor. After securing it with a rope, he carried it to the lake's edge. In the dim morning light, he eagerly set the net, stripping down and carrying the stone into the lake. After setting the net, he let out an excited howl. Since having the coracle, Mads had become the wilderness expert. Pulling up the net signaled a successful catch. Indeed, a large fish was on the net. As he continued pulling, one fish after another was laid on the grass, totaling 7. He returned to his shelter, grilling fish while warming his feet, living very comfortably. The island has officially entered winter now. Mads got up early and changed into his winter clothes, feeling a bit excited about his new outfit. Next, he planned to upgrade his bed, gathering many soft spruce branches, wrapping them in waterproof fabric, and bringing them home. He then laid a moisture-proof mat on top and finished with a high-quality green natural mattress. Lying on it felt both warm and comfortable. Henrik P woke up and was surprised to find it was already winter. Rubbing his hands together, he lamented the unpredictable climate. His drafty house was no longer suitable to live in, and he urgently needed to build the back wall. A bundle of wire he had found a few days earlier came in handy. He quickly tied it left and right to create a wall frame, and then neatly covered it with spruce branches. Although slightly open, it perfectly met his lighting needs. The camera then moved to Rasmus, who had actually caught a fish, a moment he had waited for too long. Unable to contain his excitement, he cheered loudly. Starving for days, he immediately prepared lunch. A bite of fish filled his long, empty stomach with satisfaction. Henrik D was worse off, having eaten berries for 20 days straight. He felt his muscles severely depleting. Although a vegetarian, surviving on just berries was too tough. In search of more energy, he ventured farther afield. He found that the lake water had risen significantly, submerging the stone he used to rest on. Maita's dock was almost completely underwater. She was glad she hadn't set her nets today. Otherwise, they would likely have been given away for free. She had packed her bags early, ready to flee as soon as the tide came in. The wind on the island grew stronger. Rasmus watched the huge waves crash against the rocks, knowing his fishing net was likely gone. He shouted at the wind and waves in defiance. Mads was rather odd. He stripped naked and jumped into the water, only to be frozen to tears. After his bath, he calmly stood in the wind, accepting the baptism. The next morning, the storm finally calmed down. Henrik P was amazed that his shelter was unscathed. The only discomfort was the coldness in his feet. His leaky boots troubled him. Drying his feet by the fire daily was not a solution, which made him consider quitting the competition. On the 27th day, ice grains the size of peas began to fall, covering the island. The issue of keeping warm tested everyone, and obtaining food became even more difficult. As a splash of water announced the arrival of the crew's boat, Henrik D said he was worried about a neighbor and needed to go home to check. After bidding farewell to the vegetarian, 5 contestants remained. Who would be the next to leave? Rasmus, who had struggled on berries for the month, said if he couldn't eat protein today, he would quit. But just as he was pulling up the net, a big fish surfaced, leaving him excitedly incoherent. Back at his shelter, he immediately stewed it. Unable to resist, he peeked under the lid, feeling instantly revitalized. After cooking, he took the pot outside, enjoying his lunch in the sun, which felt extremely satisfying. With his energy replenished, he decided to continue his momentum. He took his net to the other side of the lake. Despite the distance, he threw it 2 meters out. He had planned to secure the net with a tree branch, but when he returned, he found the net had already been swept into the lake. Reluctantly, he stripped again and entered the water, only to be overcome by the freezing cold. At night, a small mouse entered Maita's cabin but found no food. Maita, apparently not hungry, ignored the mouse and started crafting. She decided to make a beach chair, showcasing her impressive DIY skills, and quickly finished it. Lying on it, she felt good, sipping tea in the sun, missing only her husband and daughter's company. To ease her homesickness, she began working on the house, constructing a storage for firewood by nailing 2 sticks into the ground, neatly arranging more sticks inside, and using moss to fill any gaps. She had previously built a rain shelter to keep the firewood dry during bad weather. Sitting on the firewood, she dreamed of a happy life after winning the championship. Later, she went fishing at the lake. Henrik P tried a unique method to clean a fish he just caught, intending to squeeze out the innards. However, as he wondered about the method, the fish twisted free and jumped back into the water. Cursing, he retrieved the fish with a stick. His luck seemed uncanny, as Henrik, often found drying his shoes or feet, had painful toes from constantly wet shoes. To warm his feet, he arranged logs to form a chimney shape, a technique he had experimented with at home for significant heat. Despite initial difficulties and failures, he finally succeeded by securing the logs in a swamp with ropes, creating a rocket-shaped structure, and placing coal inside from a fire. Initially, there was no sign of success, but then the flames surged, bringing a smile to his face. Fleming's socks were so wet they could be wrung out. To find holes in his shoes, he filled them with lake water, which quickly leaked out. After identifying the holes, he used tape, questioning the reliability of finding such materials but added a layer of waterproof fabric for extra protection. Confidently, he sailed on a barrel raft, but only caught a small fish, returning to the shelter to contemplate his situation. Since acquiring a skin kayak, Mads never ran out of food. Measuring a big fish he caught, it was over a meter long, enough for a week. He planned to smoke the fish by inserting spruce branches into the ground, covering them with a barrel lid, and lighting a fire underneath. Maita, too, had success with her fishing line, catching a lively eel. Hungry after days without food, she decided to eat it despite its vigor. After struggling to kill it with a stick, she cut it into pieces, which continued to wriggle on the cutting board. Hesitant to eat them until fried, she finally relished the taste. On day 31, the crew arrived to pick up Rasmus, who couldn't endure any longer. He admitted the reality was much harder than it appeared on TV, preferring family time over money, emphasizing the importance of avocados and fried steak. 2 days passed, and after Rasmus, Henrik P also quit the competition. His feet were unbearably cold, perpetually soaked in the muddy swamp at the door, despite having a rocket stove. After much thought, he decided to go home. Mads's fishing net never disappointed him, yielding 4 big fish today. He aimed to store more fish before the lake froze. Proudly observing the round bellies of the fish, he boasted about demonstrating a special skill. Slowly stripping out the roe with his fingers, he collected it all in a basin. Back home, he began gathering materials to smoke the fish. He inserted branches into the ground to form an arched frame, topped it with fresh spruce branches, laid the prepared fish on the grill, and covered it with a barrel lid. He then placed kindling beneath and lit a fire. The fresh spruce branches didn't ignite easily, producing thick smoke before the flames shot up. Mads quickly removed the kindling below, and after the flames subsided, he found the fish unburned. Although he couldn't smoke the fish, it was still good enough to eat, but consuming it all at once seemed excessively lavish. After some days of adjustment, Maita's fishing net finally started working properly. Although the fish was small, It was crucial for her championship aspirations. With this addition, she had stored 4 fish, adhering to her plan of eating 1 fish every 2 days, sustaining her for at least another week. Fleming had often returned empty-handed from his ventures recently. Today was slightly better, but the small fish he caught was hardly enough to fill him. He thus dried and maintained his fishing net before rowing towards the deeper parts of the bay. He planned to place his net in deeper, farther waters for winter, but would have to ration until catching bigger fish, surviving on half a small fish daily. Feeling unsatisfied, he decided to supplement his diet, scraping the inner bark of birch trees into a pot, adding water, and boiling it into a soup that tasted somewhat bland and tough. On day 38 of the survival challenge, frontrunner Maita faced a setback. Arriving at the lake to check her catch, she was dismayed to find her fishing net gone. Without the net, there was no food, sinking her spirits. Returning to the shelter and looking at her family's photo, she tearfully reflected on her large house and ample firewood, confident of winning if only she had enough food. A storm had hindered her path to victory, but her determination persisted. She grabbed a stick and went to the lake, attempting to retrieve her net. Just then, a howl echoed from afar. Mads explained it was his way of greeting bears, advising them to keep their distance since he was hunting moose and not looking for a bear fight. Due to the presence of bears, Mads had to abandon his hunting trip, relying again on his fishing net. Maita finally located her net, but it was firmly stuck at the bottom of the lake. Her forceful tugging unfortunately tore it. Reluctantly, she cut off the damaged 2 meters and cast the remaining part back into the lake. That night, worried about the net, Maita couldn't sleep and returned to the lake with her headlamp. Fortunately, the net was still there and had even caught a fish, bringing new hope. Mads, too, was sleepless, living in a drafty house and freezing, singing himself to sleep. Fleming has made a strong comeback and is now the wealthiest with 9 neatly arranged fish. No longer needing to eat tree bark, he quickly set up to fry fish in his warm shelter. Maita also did well, bringing back 3 fish. She cooked the fish by the fire, planning to eat half a fish daily with some berries and preserve the rest for winter. After eating, she lingered, licking her fingers. On day 40, as rain began, everyone started crafting out of boredom. To inspire herself to the end, she carved this saying into the wall and then made a cane as a gift for her daughter, who was learning to walk. She thoughtfully carved her daughter's name on it, knowing leaving her young child was hard, but believing her well-being mattered more than her presence. Fleming also made gifts for his son, crafting impressive cowboy figurines. Indeed, solitude seemed to foster his creativity, completing 2 figurines during the rain. As the competition entered its final sprint, the 3 contestants appeared evenly matched. Mads kept catching fish, and Maita continued her success, but Fleming had the most, his fish piling up high. Fleming sat under a plaque, waiting for a victory interview and staging a scene impressively. On day 46, he pulled out a satellite phone, declaring his goals met and ready to go home, but his words were not to be trusted. The camera turned to Mads, whose hat had been chewed by a mouse. He made a trap with a jar using fish as bait and caught the mouse that night. However, unable to skin it, he reluctantly gave it to his termite neighbors. By day 52, frost covered everything on the Norwegian island, and the lake began freezing. Mads, still in his shack, had his body temperature drop to 35 degrees Celsius. If it fell further, he faced mandatory withdrawal. At night, he relied on drinking hot water to keep warm. If he didn't hurry to fix his shelter, he wouldn't last much longer. The fish outside had frozen solid, and after this meal, he had little food left. Maita hadn't caught any fish for 3 days, and her energy was fading due to lack of food. On day 53, Fleming was sunbathing and having lunch, but the nice weather was short-lived as clouds soon covered the sun. He knew it was time to check his nets, and he was lucky to catch a fish today. He felt weaker while rowing, and when he returned to his shelter, he found a mouse stealing his food. Enraged, he tried to hit it with a stick, but missed several times and was mocked by the mouse. By day 55, it was Christmas, and it snowed, increasing the cold. Mads couldn't take it anymore. Despite never running out of food, the cold was nearly unbearable. A sturdy, warm shelter proved crucial. After Mads left, it was down to Maita and Fleming. Maita caught a big fish, her first in many days. Seeing the hard-earned food, she almost saw the $500,000 prize waving at her. But soon she realized her dilemma when she missed her period this month, a sign of severe body fat loss, which is irreversible and damaging. Confused, she faced a tough situation. Fleming also had a hard time, eating earthworms, chewing bark, and picking up discarded fish heads. Soon, it was time for a routine checkup. Fleming had lost over 40 pounds and Maita had lost 30. But the doctor had bad news for her. Her body couldn't support menstruation anymore, a serious issue for women. She needed to consider her options. Thinking about how hard she fought to stay in the competition, she cried at the thought of possibly having to leave due to health reasons. On day 58, Maita decided to withdraw from the competition. She wanted to win but couldn't ignore the damage to her body. Money can be earned back, but health is irreplaceable. With Maita's departure, Fleming won the competition, but the producers didn't tell him and asked if he was motivated to continue. They then secretly brought his family to him. Seeing his family, whom he missed dearly, Fleming was overwhelmed with emotion. His wife jumped into his arms, and they kissed passionately. The family hugged tightly. His wife brought a basket full of food, and Fleming showed his family around his shelter, presenting the gifts he prepared and expressing his longing for them. This was the most touching finale of all the seasons of wilderness living. The season ended here.